Hello and welcome everybody to this channel. We discuss odd, interesting, and unique parts of history, myths, legends, real or to be determined. And while today's episode has to do with like the paranormal, more specifically extraterrestrial visitation, I want to note this channel's content is not exclusive to just that. We discuss, like I said, real and myth. So, yeah, and legends. So, yeah. But today, as you can see, we're discussing David Huggins, a man in his mid 60s, experiencing a unique extraterrestrial visitation. And if you stick around, you'll see what I mean. While most stories have fearful encounters, his is rather different. Now, I first found out David Huggins from the internet show Danny Brown's Danny's House. Kind of, if you're familiar with the rapper Danny Brown, he basically made like a little podcast, sit around show. Pretty cool. If you like his music, I already like Danny Brown. Anything about Danny Brown, I'd recommend checking it out. It seems like a cool, fun show. But David Huggins, he went in there to discuss some of the details about his encounters. Children, you'll see what I mean as you watch. Paintings of his encounters, among many other things. He went into more detail as well in the documentary Love and Saucers, which, if you haven't seen and this story interests you, I highly recommend checking it out. Was not my exclusive source, but I kind of made it my main source, if that makes sense. I looked into a lot of articles and interviews he's done as well. The documentary was kind of like, I felt like it was like the best representation of him uncensored, just him letting him talk. And it was a great documentary. Whether you buy the story or not, I just, if it interests you or you just want to hear David talk, I recommend it. Of course, keep watching this while I do retell the stories. Because I like I said, I mentioned other sources as well, but I really recommend checking out Danny's House and Love and Saucers as well.
I'm a poor
Let's start off with his early life. David was born in Paulding County, Georgia, a vast rural area on a farmland. He lived like a true farmer, raising animals and cutting firewood. He grew up with a brother and a sister,
I'm a
and while
poor
he was attending a evangelical church, possibly Pentecostal, because he mentioned speaking in tongues, and I believe he said something about snake handling, he was quickly turned off from religion, but he did really appreciate growing up in a small town. He often hunted arrowheads, and now this is where we begin our first encounter. If you're familiar with the story, these alien encounters were not as unique to start off with. So if you know where this story is going, just be aware it wasn't always like that. David was at the age of 8, so thankfully it didn't start that crazy that early. And just FYI, if anyone's watching this and you don't know about the birds and the bees, gonna discuss some stuff. But yeah, as I was saying, in 1952, at the age of 8, while playing at a tree, he was hearing a voice call his name. And as he turns around, he sees a large, hairy creature, glowing eyes, approaching him. This is, of course, one of several ETs that he sees later, but this was his first encounter. In fear, he ran, and as he looked back, he noticed seeing this hairy creature go back into the woods. Yet, as I mentioned, this, of course, is not his only encounter. Shortly later in the same year, as he was grabbing a baseball from his family's barn stable, he begins to hear noises on the other side where he sees something there. He checks it out, and it looks to be a giant praying mantis-like being, and in fear, David screamed. And being real, as an 8-year-old, if you saw a giant insect creature, you would scream. I mentioned this insect, the way he describes and paints it, was almost towering over him. And in fear, as he screamed, this creature soon sprayed him with this grayish blue, almost liquid substance that evaporated as he ran away. This creature was also recurring as he encountered. From everything I'm able to gather, to be honest with you, every ET that he has experienced was reoccurring. So this wasn't a subject of, I saw a blue one and the next week I saw an orange one, but I never saw those two again. It seemed like every encounter that David experienced was not exclusive. As his encounters continued into next year, one day he began walking to a friend's house and was getting the feeling of being watched. And he looks over and sees a gray alien peeking behind a bush. And he soon fades, and his vision turns to white, and is soon surrounded by several grays. As he passes out, he then wakes up in a field covered chest deep in weeds while hearing three beeps. When seeing extraterrestrial life as a child, he often ran away and hid from them until they left him. So he would tell his parents, and in doing so, they would often mock and ridicule him. One time, he said, "Quit making things up, there's nothing there," after saying that there was an extraterrestrial there, and they beat him. The day after, he went behind his house, and there was a woman, possibly one that we'll later know as Crescent, with a few other Greys, and the praying mantis. He told them about the beating and how no one believes him. The one that we believe might be Crescent appeared to be troubled by this. So she looked at him in response and said, "Don't tell him." And after that, he never said a word. And to be fair, whatever your view on this story is, I got to admit that that's pretty on point. Whether this ET was real or not, I think David not telling his parents after that makes a lot of sense. I mean, yeah, like, why would he share this experience to a guardian who would only mock, ridicule him, and even hit him? On a side note, I'm not a parent or an expert. I'm not trying to get political here. This shouldn't be a political issue, but I just don't think it's a great idea to hit your children at all, but especially when they come to you in that role of, "Hey, I need your guardianship." Anyway, yet one time as he hid from them, I don't know if the beings thought, "Okay, enough is enough," or it's time. Maybe they've always been doing this. But one night as he laid in bed, he saw a group of Greys peering through his window, then soon entered his room, where they abducted him and took him aboard their ship, where he met one of the most noble aliens, Crescent. Now, Crescent looked like the other Greys, but unlike the Greys, she had a more feminine, taller features. And as they met, this time at least, she appears to put something up his nose. And a smaller gray alien held him as he said to them, you hurt me," she said, to look at him, and that pain drifted away. David, interesting, kind of said, like, "Hey, you know how we tag birds or livestock?" He almost viewed it the same way. And whatever you're feeling about these tales of extraterrestrial encounters or alien visitations, they always do, whether they're hostile, friendly, or neutral, it always seems to be someone was tagged like livestock. So that's something that was always very interesting. Those two earlier stories may or may not have been Crescent, but what is clear is the most noble ET known as Crescent was present at around the age of 17. As he was walking through the woods to a friend's house, he sees a woman in the woods as well. And she looks at him and begins to approach David. And David, being a 17-year-old boy, kind of gets this urge and soon as he's aroused and tries taking his pants off as quick as he can as he falls to the ground, where the two begin to become intimate. As she's on top David, she makes him, well, yeah, you get the picture. He describes the finishing act as painful and intense as he looks into her eyes. You can see he kind of paints her eyes like the standard typical gray aliens, but with almost like this blue light, blue iris rather. What I found interesting, I don't know if this is how we can tell Crescent from the others in their accounts. You mentioned that Greys often wore wigs, and the ones that wore wigs were always kind of badly kept, and mentioned in one interview how he looked over and saw one fixing its wig, and it just fell onto the ground, and saw it pick it up and put it back on. And yeah, but they're always kind of put on in like a sloppy manner, always falling off. But Crescent even described like that. So I don't know, but I mean, unlike, well, many of us may have lost it in with a girlfriend, or with a one night stand, or like with a quick one night in a car, bedroom, or familiar place. With David, he lost it in the woods with an alien. So, however odd your first story is, just know it could be weirder. David began growing tired of living in the rural area. Although he loved growing up there, he wanted more. And as a side note, I grew up in a small town, so I felt at that age of David saying, "You want to escape this and go to a big city." Like his experiences with extraterrestrials, David soon grew up growing fond of painting, which his parents were not exactly supportive of. So one day, while his parents were gone, he left them a note saying, "Hey, I'm joining an art student league in New York City," and left at 19. while he was living in New York. Although he moved from the woods, like a rural town almost empty, to a concrete jungle filled with people and buildings, his encounters did not stop. In fact, one day after class, this was during the 1965 bus worker strike, David grew a little tired and he's like, you know what, I need to walk home. It's in the middle of the rain. He says, what the hell? So he can't take the bus, so he sticks his thumb out trying to hitch a ride. And as he does so, a black sedan pulls up. And he asks the woman in the black sedan giving him a ride through Grand Central Park. And he notices kind of a strange silence with this woman. He doesn't really directly say it, but I almost feel like he's trying to say that this is Crescent giving him a ride. What is noticeable about this is after this ride, he began to have repeated dreams of what is described as this woman's face being surrounded in dark, getting closer to him, and every morning hearing the words, "We'll be back tonight," which, creepy. During this time, David definitely can't question his sanity and can't tell if these counters are real. He soon decides one day after class, as he's just questioning was it real or not, to buy flowers. So before bed, he states, "This is for you," and leaves it on his counter. And as he woke up the next morning, he had the same dream, and he realized his female encounter took the flowers, and that was the confirmation he needed. And then from this moment on, David did consider Crescent as his girlfriend. See, at this time, David had dates, but nothing really took off. And anyone in college, I feel like you could kind of relate to that. I feel like dating in college is a fun but non-serious part. As unconventional as it seems might be dating an extraterrestrial during college, dating in college in general is almost unconventional. It's an unconventional time, and you never know what's going to happen. You might start dating an extraterrestrial. So, before we get further in the story, I want to discuss some of the aliens that we have encountered, or extraterrestrials. First off is Crescent, his gray alien lover, but was human, like a human and gray hybrid. But this is the alien. I'm hoping I'm finding a photo that's not so explicit, but this is her. She has more human-like features and what Dave describes as a nice body and long nails, but he said he had that pale face and almost large almond-like eyes, as he described them in his paintings. David described his relationship with Crescent to be, well, intimate, as well almost like in a personal in some manner. He described it as a warm yet strange feeling. It was a strange and unconventional thing to have an extraterrestrial as your girlfriend in the 1960s. Now, she isn't the only large or female one it describes, meaning other large and woman ones as well, which he also did some business with. As you just mentioned, as far as I'm able to tell, he only did it with the large female ones, so he only did business with them. Then there was the hairy alien with glowing eyes. How he described this alien was with the glowing eyes. It always made him uneasy, but David mentions he never really felt threatened nor endangered as his encounters continued. In fact, he stated these things have all helped David in various ways, especially with his mental health, which we'll kind of get into. There was a small grays, which David often felt like they're almost sort of worker likes. And on a side note, one thing I always kind of find interesting is, like I mentioned in my previous video, I love studying weird things. And one of those things being alien encounters. And often people who encounter the smaller grays always describe them as being like worker like. So I don't know, it is kind of interesting. I always try to encounter these stories and like there's an explanation behind everything, but there is a lot of similarities, one of which being that the smaller grays are workers, which I always found pretty interesting. There was a leader, which there was almost two leaders, but he was saying it was a tall being with a sort of knot on the back, and then there was a praying mantis, and this one was like a praying mantis but larger. And David always said that he was treated and talked to as a child by this alien. But sometimes David claims he was a leader, but like I said, there was another leader. Perhaps there was like one is like in the second command or co-pilot, or they're both leaders or something. I don't know. So yeah, all of these appear to be coming back from his early life into his adulthood, with a later addition happening with the children. One night, David is awakened by Crescent and the other extraterrestrials sitting around and saying, "David, the baby is dying, the baby is dying." Now, David is confused. David's like, "What baby? Whose baby? What are you talking about?" And they say, your baby, our baby is dying. And David's like, what are you talking about? And Crescent, I shouldn't laugh at this. I'm sorry. It's because they grab the baby out of this container and Crescent's holding it, dangling it, in fact, and saying the baby is dying. We don't know what's wrong. And David is shocked for multiple reasons. One of which is he has a baby with an alien, which is very reasonably shocked by. Another is that its mother is dangling, whether that's your baby or not. I If a baby is being dangled, I would definitely have my jaw to the floor because like what? Excuse me? And David's like, no, that's not how you hold a baby. Kind of just baffling to me that there's this species that's like whether they're interdimensional or interplanetary, but like they can travel space and time and all this or whatever, and like they come with this crazy amazing technology, but they don't know how to hold a baby. That I don't know. I think that's just really funny. David tries to walk over to Crescent saying, no, you need to cradle it, you need to cradle it. But these state, you cannot come over. David's basically like, the hell? This is my baby. I'm going to walk over there. What the hell? You're going to keep me away from my baby. Like, I don't care if it's an alien. Like, I'm going to take care of my baby. And David grows frustrated, tries to save his child, and passes out. He then wakes up on a ship. And the praying mantis kind of seems irritated by him being here, which I'm like, he's been there many other times. So it's like, oh, you're still the guy in the middle of the night. And for once he comes on your door, it's like, now you're irritated. It's like, you're still the guy since he was a child. Like, is now him being here inconvenient for you? Like, he's basically like, what are you doing here? And David was like, I'm here to save my child. And he looks at the child and he soon touches it, and the child is awakened and begins moving. David describes it best as almost like an energy transfer. Like, look, we're talking about aliens and alien children, so if that's a little too hokey for you, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't write this story. I mean, I wrote the script, like little pinpoints for me to write on and stuff, but you know what I'm saying. But the praying mantis around this time seems to kind of have a change of mind and is like, oh, okay, well, follow me. So as David follows him, he walks into a room filled with these children, and David's like, whose kids are these? And praying mantis like points to him. David so much wasn't as scared or creeped out as much as he was just shocked. Like, no, 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 no. These are not all my babies. These aren't all mine. I mean, you gotta admit, he slept with a lot of aliens, so of course he's gonna have a lot of alien children. With that being said, he does have a pretty good sense of humor. Later wrote about this, saying, how am I going to put all these children through college? But he quickly accepted these children, and he realized they were all sick. But he did the same thing he did with these children as he did the first child, and did this energy transfer touch that kind of made him feel all better. So take with that as you will. Yet David has stated he always went back and questioned his sanity the next day. Like, was that real? Was that just a crazy dream? Somehow forget these tales until it happened again, which it's such a unique tale, he's not even sure why he keeps forgetting it. But soon he began to be left alone as he grew older. One could believe to him having a sort of breakdown in the middle of the night, saying that his children were dying, and the aliens had to be like, no, the children are fine, David. Like, why are you freaking out? Perhaps if any of the story is true, the ETs kind of recognize that, like, hey, we're causing a bit of psychological stress to this one guy. Maybe we should kind of ease off on him. But he later got married to a human. David kind of started this whole nuclear family with his wife and soon had a kid. And kind of forgot about the whole extraterrestrial encounters, with almost like no remembrance or thought of it until one night in the mid 1980s. He felt like he was being watched. He had that anxiety of being watched and nervousness, and he had a feeling rising up, and he soon found a book about extraterrestrials and soon found others and came across one about details about where, like, I guess you can describe like a succubus or succubi encounters. And David began to remember everything and sort of have to come to terms with what he went through. While this could be due to recollection, another theory could be about his failing marriage and a rising divorce as well. You see, upon confronting his ex-wife about his encounters and how he believes he has children and ex relationship with an extraterrestrial, she called him crazy, which I'm not judging either story here, and this was kind of the last nail in the coffin for their marriage. He even told Michael, his son, when he was younger about some people he may know, like some half siblings and half brothers and half sisters he has. He may have been alluding where he has no idea where they are from, which, to be fair, like either mean that David is a sort of player or he is a, well, I guess he was a player for Aliens, so never mind. But he doesn't know where he's from, and to get the details right. But his son does admit that, like, yeah, they've talked about it, but they never really had a sit down conversation and like a whole heart to heart about it. Because he recalls, finding paintings that his dad painted. But like I said, he's never really had a prolonged talk. Well, as his son said, he never really had a prolonged talk about it. You see, as I mentioned, David painted his encounters during this time where in the mid 80s, late 80s, where David was kind of having not the best mental health time, dwelling on these nights where he couldn't sleep, and this is around his divorce. He was like this for months until the extraterrestrials visited him again, saying, "Hey, you're not doing so good," and gave him permission and almost like a suggestion to like, "Why don't you paint these encounters? Why don't you paint what you're going through?" So he began painting, and he finally got sleep. He got questioned in an interview if the ETs themselves or even his children's paint, which he wasn't too sure about. I feel like if he was making this up, I feel like he would try to relate them more with him, but that's just me. Although they seem to not mind him and even encourage him to paint for his mental health, they don't like him painting things that didn't happen. One time he started painting something that kind of didn't exactly happen. The ETs kind of grew frustrated with him and got upset. And he told them to paint, but only paint things that happen. Go to the truth, don't make things up. Which regardless, like I can admire. I don't know how much in detail it is. Like if David wants to paint, like I'm hoping they're just about his encounters. Like if David wants to paint a blue cow because they think it'll look cool, I still hope that the ETs don't get upset about him just wanting to paint a blue cow because he thinks blue cows are cool. I don't know. I'm a little torn on it with the artistic freedom here, but um, perhaps that's a whole nother thing for another story. David lives in Hoboken, New Jersey. He writes scripts and paints, as I said, but he does have an affinity for VHS, which I can relate a lot to David. I love VHS. I don't collect VHS, but I do have an affinity for the movies he does. But I do admire David's VHS collection and his movie taste overall. I would honestly love picking his brain apart and talking more than just extraterrestrials with him, maybe even just movies and stuff with him. He had an art museum, I think, back in 2022 at the end of the documentary. Currently, he works part-time at a deli, and he lives with his ex-wife for the past 4 years, which, as I was doing this research for this video, I came across this comment. One thing I do admire, according to David, he kind of broke that family cycle and said, you know what, like, I never laid a hand on my child. It just goes to show why I think David is a nice and genuine guy, from what I've read and seen, and his child only has great things to say about him. When I read these stories, I often like to read them in the sense of like, well, they possibly really did happen. Yet, I always have to come back and set expectations and ground myself with this. And as I did, there was a few questions I've heard other people ask, and myself included. First off is his love of sci-fi and horror movies. Like me, as I said, he loves these movies. One of which is The Thing, which he saw around 7, a few months prior to his first encounter. And this is one thing I kind of want to touch on is there may have been abuse that was beyond beating, if you get my drift. Many have theorized that David may have, and this was his way of coping or escaping that. And personally, as describing the story is, this is one story I hope is true because I would rather not anyone go through that. As much as I think this story is a little out there and it's like a little wild, I honestly kind of hope it's true and it's not that. At least it's not that explanation because that is really disheartening. But most notably, it could have been other abuse as well. His parents were abusive. His parents drink a lot. Just overall, his parents were kind of abusive, both emotionally and physically to him. I don't know if I ever got to that level I mentioned earlier, but I certainly hope not. During his encounters, it's almost like David experienced these things kind of in a time of frustration. At 17, I can't speak for everyone, but I remember at 17, if you can't get a date, that's a very frustrating time. And as I mentioned, college was definitely a interesting time as well. And then there was the thing of divorce, and as the divorce happened, he started having these encounters and this art collection again. So it almost could seem like, well, maybe David is coping with the loss of not having around and having an alien. And some claim to think that, well, he made money from his encounters and his interviews and his paintings. And another question is, why David? Why did they choose David? One thing I'm not judging, but people have pointed out is that David practices meditation and many like Eastern philosophies and like New Age beliefs, which, like I said, no shame or no judgment on. But some people have pointed out saying, well, he believes in all these things, so he's just kind of tied with this. Which, to be fair, I'm going to get into like discrediting or kind of counteracting all these negative claims to David in a second here. But this is one I kind of want to take on head on first, is just saying, well, to be fair, we all believe in some weird things, and Eastern religion and New Age beliefs are not all that different from Western beliefs. So who's to say David, with his Eastern and New Age beliefs, is any more different? Like I said, I like to come at things in a very down to earth level, but so this is where I kind of want to counter those denials of David and his experience. Like I said, if you want to believe this story, great. If you don't, that's great too. It's just anytime I mention something about a truth or a lie, I want to counter it with some sort of counter. I think that's very fair for David and his case. Many, like I said, and myself included, just from seeing on a screen, reading about him, consider him a very down to earth and genuine guy. And even when he recounts his story, he seems very genuine and honest in how he tells it, and even kind of questions his own sanity and his own experiences, which I found kind of admirable because I think that's something very important to do as you tell any story, asking yourself, did this really happen? Regardless of how realistic it seems. Now, one thing was people questioning, well, why is he painting all these paintings? To be fair, if you experienced something that was kind of not explainable or maybe even traumatic, and you had an output, many people share that experience with such output, such as poetry, writing movies, etc. So why is David any different? And to be fair, he's not exactly a millionaire. While many have argued his obsession with sci-fi and horror, many others and his college professor named Jeffrey Kripal have kind of stated and concluded is that's not entirely the case. Sometimes the encounters happen before the sci-fi movies, or the encounters lead to the obsession and not the obsession lead to the encounter, which I found pretty interesting and honestly I can kind of somewhat agree with. So it does make sense that, hey, they're experiencing this, why not connect to something that can somewhat relate to it? Now, there's one thing that even David kind of questions is why him? Why is David their sort of bull? David even himself kind of considers himself not important, which someone has a fantasy that's often it's often egotistical driven. They say I'm chosen because of my genes, or I'm chosen because of my strong fatigue or something. And to be honest, many who study the subject have found very much similar stories to what David has stated. And most importantly, David doesn't really care about your opinions. David's like, you know what, you can believe me or you don't. He knows what he's seen and he knows what he lives, and he isn't sure if the aliens are from another planet or another universe, but he knows what he's experienced and he lives with that. Well, that is our first story for this channel. Let me know what to look into next. And keep in mind, these stories in history can be extravagant, they can be legends, they can be real, they could be myths, it could be anything. Overall, I guess this is just kind of a way of us telling stories. The usuals: like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed this video, but even if you didn't, just enjoy your day and have a great day. But with that being said, you may be wondering, why am I focused on this random painting? Well, this is something I painted. Me and some friends had a painting class, like not painting class, but like a painting um, venture together. Like at the time when I first started researching this video, and I had aliens on the mind, and yeah, so I painted the UFO. My inspiration was that X-Files picture, which I'm going to show right here. And yeah, I mean, as you can see, I'm not a great artist, but I thought it was just funny, kind of cool, show you guys. Because my next video, well, my video that's on my other channel, I kind of made a similar thing that me and my girlfriend painted, or well, we're painting, and I had Halo on the mind, and I made a video about Halo. So I made a Halo picture. So I don't know. I just thought it was kind of cool to show you guys.